listening to the Astral Hour. I'm your host, Astral Meadow. Join me as we take a glimpse into the mysterious. Welcome, everyone. For today's episode, I'm joined once again with my husband, Justin, and we are going to explore how Carl Jung's model of the psyche aligns with astrological archetypes, planetary symbolism, and the birth chart. In this episode, we hope to offer insight into how astrology can be used as a tool for individuation and self-integration. Welcome to the show.
Hey, I'm glad to be back, as always. It's always fun to do an episode with you. It's been a little while, so I'm happy to be back.
Yeah, I love having you on. I feel like I can really relax into myself when we're doing these episodes together in a way that is harder to do through Zoom or with people that I don't know so closely. So I really appreciate the safe container that you give me to share my work and passions with the audience.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I feel the same way. I'm very relaxed, and it most of the time, besides the studying, it just seems like we're sitting here having a conversation like we normally do, right. And it's super easy and always laid back. So, and the conversation's fantastic and deep, and I always learn something. So it's a win-win.
Right.
So I guess we will start at the beginning, and we need to give a little bit about Carl Jung. So who is Carl Jung?
So Carl Gustav Jung lived between 1875 and 1961. He was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst who founded analytical psychology. He developed concepts like the collective unconscious, archetypes, and the process of individuation, which we will explore more as we go through this episode. He believed that symbolic systems such as dreams, myths, and astrology could help us understand and integrate unconscious material, which will be the aspect of his work that we focus on the most today.
So why did Jung take astrology seriously as a psychological tool?
So I really love Jung's ability to kind of intertwine logic and mysticism. He had this really special gift of being able to sort of bridge the gaps between these two worlds. He saw astrology as an ancient archetypal system. It aligned with his understanding of the unconscious and synchronicity, and he used it to track psychological patterns in himself and his patients. So, he was really applying astrology alongside his other work, and it sort of helped give a voice to certain phases of life or certain experiences that his patients might not always be able to articulate properly. So it kind of gave him more of an insight into some depths to see them more clearly from this more symbolic perspective. So there is a long-standing connection between astrology and the psyche. Carl Jung's interest in astrology stemmed from its alignment with his alchemical research. His followers recognized astrology as a meaningful tool in analytical psychology. And today, many Jungian analysts and holistic practitioners consult these astrological charts as a part of their work. So he kind of paved the way there for applying it in this really positive way, in this really practical way. So overall, astrology is a part of his broader effort to map the unconscious, not through this superstition, but allowing it to come forward and speak through the symbolic language. So the glyphs and symbols that come up through astrology help stimulate intuitive insight. So the chart becomes this visual gateway into the psyche and psychological processes. And it becomes valid not through literalism, but through synchronicity.
Just what work you've done with me on my own chart, that already makes total sense, because there's so many aspects of having your chart read astrologically
Mm-hmm.
that shows me different areas of conscious things and unconscious things. And
Right. And
so,
it gives us this outlet and like this different medium in which to explore things that are hard because they aren't conscious. So we have to utilize certain tools, and we're trying to bring that unconscious material up, and astrology is just a really beautiful way to do that. So I really love this quote by Saffron Rossi, who worked with this, I can't think of the other guy that she worked with off the top of my head, to compile all of Jung's work and any quotes that he had on astrology. So I just did this whole deep dive into her, and she had this great episode with Chris Brennan on the Astrology podcast that I just recently watched. And this is sort of a quote that I compiled together from a couple of things that she said. So she says, in exploring the unconscious, our self-knowledge deepens and expands. We can work with unconscious aspects through the symbolism of the birth chart. Our awareness is expanded when we connect experiences and issues to archetypal patterns in the chart. So I really loved how she kind of summarized that so beautifully. And people should definitely check that out if they want to explore this topic more, because she just is an amazing speaker. So,
yeah. Well, what does it mean to engage the birth chart as a map of the conscious and the unconscious?
so it means viewing the chart not just as a personality tool, which is how most of us are introduced to astrology,
Right.
to look at it more as the symbolic representation of our entire psyche, our conscious desires, our unconscious drives, our soul potential. And I'm going to read a little bit from one of my favorite astrologers, Alice O'Howe, who was one of my first introductions into astrology. So it's interesting how everybody kind of comes into it through different means, but I was already really deeply enmeshed into Jung's work when I first started being drawn to astrology. So my getting my toes wet actually came from this perspective of Jungian astrology. So that's
Oh,
actually my
nice.
introduction. So I'm going to quote her, and I'll probably reference back to her a lot because so much of the foundations of how I've kind of learned astrology came from her. She's just this amazing teacher and this just quirky, brilliant lady.
Yeah, we watched a video of her. I'd never seen her before, and she was really fantastic. Just totally her own self, and a really cool old lady.
All right, so I'm going to read this quote from her book, Jungian Symbolism and Astrology. One has to see astrology as a symbolic language, uniting that outer and inner, and as a language of correspondences. A symbol mediates between levels of consciousness, and this astrology does with ease. It is, as astrologer philosopher Dane Rudyard put it, an algebra of life. It has the capacity to convert things through symbols and processes, and a symbol is the best way to describe something that is in a constant state of flux. So I really love that perspective on it. This is a most profound thought. It leads us to an appreciative acceptance of what Jung called archetypes or primordial images. The closest we can come to dealing with universal processes is to personify them and make them into gods, which is to acknowledge with reverence the level of their reality. Astrology helps us to decode the gods back into archetypal processes that they represent and still represent in the outer world of nature and events, and in the inner world of meaning in the psyche. Symbols are images when we read them with the right brain. The chart shows nothing but glyphs or symbols, so images arise quite spontaneously when we look at one. Thus, we should not be surprised that a synchronicity exists and that the images are indeed valid. So that's just a really good quote from her kind of going into this.
So, with symbols in mind, how can symbols support healing and self-awareness?
So symbols act as bridges between the known and the unknown. allowing us to name, engage, and integrate unconscious material safely and creatively. So symbols act as mediators between conscious levels. Astrology is described as a symbolic bridge between outer and inner, uniting levels of consciousness. So symbols help us understand the psyche's movement and process. By personifying universal forces, we connect to archetypes and honor their reality within us. So astrology in itself can be seen as a sort of language of the soul, helping us to access, name, and honor these different archetypal energies. So Alice also introduced me to looking at astrology through my whole brain. I tried to find this quote. I know it's in this book, but I couldn't go right to it. But she gave this example of when you're driving and there's these different types of signs. So some will say, turn right on exit, 324 or whatever. And it's written out. It's very literal. It's exact. Like this is a concrete fact, right? Mm-hmm. And then we also have signs like the deer jumping over, the fence, or, there's certain like flood signs. It's just like the car swerving or whatever. And both of these signs are activating a part of us, right? We're getting information from both. So the left brain is activated with that written road sign, and the right brain is more activated from the symbolic pictures.
That's really interesting.
So the richest astrology happens when we're bridging both of these hemispheres, when we're using the left brain to structure and decode, mm-hmm. and we're using the right brain to feel, allow our intuition to move through us and imagine, right? And that's where we get these beautiful visuals that come up when we see certain placements in a chart, like a story starts to unfold. Even if I don't know a person, mm-hmm. Their myth starts to come alive. Before I've applied a lot of logic, the pictures will come first. And as these pictures come forward, the logical aspects start to make sense, especially as that person starts to talk.
Right.
And so it's a really beautiful perspective on allowing both hemispheres of our brain to be active when we are working with our natal chart.
So what would you say is synchronicity in the Jungian sense?
So I really like defining synchronicity because I think it's one of those words that we just kind of throw around a lot. And I think sometimes the more we use a word, like it starts to kind of dilute the original definition, and I kind of start to forget, like, well, how would I actually define this? Right? And this is an exercise that we do in this Akashic Records class a lot. Like she'll ask us to define a word, and everybody's definition is like really unique and different, but we're all kind of getting at the essence. So synchronicity is a term coined by Carl Jung to describe these meaningful coincidences and events that are connected not by cause and effect, but by symbolic resonance. So in Jung's words, synchronicity is a causal connecting principle. It's when something in your inner world, like a thought or a dream or an emotion, is mirrored by something in the outer world in a way that feels deeply significant, even if there's no logical reason for this connection. So some examples of this would be when you think of someone mm-hmm. and then they call.
Right.
Or when you're pulling tarot or oracle cards and somehow it's perfectly mirroring or reflecting your current emotional or physical state. Or seeing like repeated symbols, so numbers that align and connect with your personal transformation and where you're at on your journey at that time. So these moments of synchronicity suggest that the psyche and the cosmos are intertwined and interconnected. That our inner and outer worlds reflect each other through these various archetypal patterns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's one of the ways that is reflective of the universe talks to you or us,
Right, we are in relationship with it.
Right. And the more that you can pick up on the synchronicities, the more you start to see what the universe is saying, or it's connected with your psyche and what's important and what you should be paying attention to.
Right, because spirit is speaking to us through synchronicity.
Right.
And once you start to pay attention, it's quite a beautiful friendship because you're in a constant communication
Mm-hmm.
with the cosmos. And it's almost like we build that relationship through the course of our life. We come to trust it a little bit more as it starts to almost consistently prove itself to you, right?
Right. Yeah, the more you see it and the more it comes up and you can relate it to your life, the more it builds on itself and the more you trust it and the more you see it again and again.
Right.
And,
right. And I think the more you
snowballs.
welcome those experiences, the more you'll have them.
Yeah, I think so too. And
It's sort of like allowing them to happen.
Right. And like I said, I've always seen that as the universe speaking
Right.
to us.
Right. Absolutely.
So, do you think you can explain how the model of the psyche works and how it connects with parts of the natal chart?
All right. I can definitely do this. It will take a minute to break it all down, but I'm going to try to do this in a really coherent way. So, for anyone listening, you can easily Google Carl Jung's model of the psyche and look at the picture of how it all kind of interconnects, and that may be helpful to kind of just keep on hand as I go through this so that you can relate it back to the model of the psyche. So I guess the big one would be the ego. We'll start there because so many people have bumped into this concept already. So the ego can correspond in the self to the sun. So the ego is what we think we are, and the sun in astrology is representing our core identity, our vitality, our conscious purpose. The self is the generator of the psyche. One might refer to it as the Christ within or the Atman, the center of conscious awareness. So overall, these archetypes are the blueprint for wholeness. So they're the central archetypes of unity and integration. I see the self as the culmination of the entire chart, but the sun is a great centralizing point to focus on. And this is challenging, so if you read books on astrology, you almost always see that the sun is the ego, right? And as I was going back over Alice O'Howell's notes, she talks about how she actually disagrees with this, which caused me to go into a whole loop on why is that. And she said that she sees the sun as the self. And this opened up my mind to kind of viewing it through this multifaceted lens, because you cannot draw a natal chart. So this is something that in the beginning of my work, I would always hand draw a chart.
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot draw a chart without drawing a circle within a circle.
Right.
Which is the sun glyph, right? So the chart itself has the sun glyph.
Oh, okay. I see.
Just inherently within it. And then we have the actual sun glyph within the chart.
Wow.
So I kind of see it as it can be both. And I really love the visual of the sun glyph as sort of thinking of the centralizing point as being the self. And the circle around it being more connected to the ego. And this is where you can be really creative with astrology, and it doesn't have to be applied in such a concrete way that we say this is exactly what the glyphs mean, because the glyphs are living symbols. And they speak to you differently on different days, just like the sun glyph spoke to me differently through viewing it through these different perspectives, which is why I think it's so healthy to kind of read other people's views on it and reflect on yours, and and just see the unique ways that we can approach this modality. So you could look at the sun glyph, which is that circle with the centralized point. You could look at this as mirroring the Ouroboros. So this could symbolize the ongoing journey of individuation, right? The circle symbolically tends to represent wholeness, while the centralized point being the self. As we grow and evolve, we can continuously meet ourselves anew. We spiral deeper into ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And Carl Jung's individuation process, which we'll go into more later, is a lifelong journey.
Yeah.
It's not something that you just do and now you're done, right? It's like that transformation of meeting yourself, these experiences that allow us to see ourselves from these different perspectives, they will continue to happen.
Yeah.
I also really love looking at the sun glyph as sort of that centralized point as being like this oak seed, right? And sometimes like a seed might be dormant for a long time, but once it's planted, right, that shell starts to break free. And I kind of see the shell as the ego a little bit, like it's trying to protect the self. But the self like wants this authentic expression. So eventually the self will burst through that shell. Not that we ever fully transcend the ego, but we're like, no, right?
Mm-hmm.
The self wants to be actualized. And so once we plant it, that individuation journey starts.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, to me, sort of the circle around it, right? We're going to keep coming back to new truths, seeing ourselves through new perspectives. So the self is the whole psyche. So it's the conscious and the unconscious, while the ego is just a small conscious part that thinks that it's in control. And this, when you look at the self as the whole psyche, why I have to say that I see the self as the whole chart. But I can also see how it would be reflected and how it would be nice to have a centralized point to sort of hyperfixate on. So as above, so below, I think that you can see those themes coming back into what is the sun in our chart, right? We can reflect back on that and really see our conscious purpose in life.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives us sort of a focal point, right? But I have a hard time seeing, like almost limiting myself just to that one particular placement. But I think we can grow and learn a lot by working with our sun. And there's a reason why it's what everybody says, I am a this. Yeah. And it's like, well, that's your sun sign. But I understand why you might identify with it, because we might initially identify with the ego, right? Yeah. We might identify with our name and our place and our position and our job. And so, it's like there's a lot of paradoxes when you're working with astrology that kind of start to get the gears turning. So I always tell people to kind of approach it with this open mind and allow it room to evolve and grow as you grow. So the next part of the model of the psyche that I'm going to go into is the personal unconscious. And this can be found by looking at the moon or the IC. So the personal unconscious is made up of repressed experiences and memories, complexes. And the moon is a lot of times connected to, you'll see it in books, it's the subconscious, right? And so is the IC in a lot of ways. So Jung doesn't use the term subconscious, but it fits into his model of the personal unconscious. So the term subconscious was first used by the French psychologist Pierre Janet in the late 19th century. He used it to describe the part of the mind that operates below the level of conscious awareness, i.e. the unconscious. Right. Freud also theorized about a non-conscious part of the mind, which he also called it the unconscious, and later referred to as the pre-conscious. So I think all of these, different words that are describing it all come back to the same overarching theme, which Carl Jung would say is the personal unconscious. So the moon is our feeling body. It's connected to our emotions, our early imprinting or programming. I really look at, the IC, which means Amum Coeli, which is Latin for bottom of the sky. It is one of the four major angles in a chart. which I can get more into that in a moment. But I see the moon as sort of, and the I see as being like the culmination of our developmental years and the programs that we have sort of accumulated and been things that we've been sort of passed down through certain characteristics or being around our family in those early years that now are a part of us. But a lot of times we've repressed and we've sort of disconnected consciously from the origins of like where this pattern started, or, you know, I developed this thing or whatever. And so it starts to go into the unconscious as we grow, but it's still there. And I'm going to read from The Planets Within. I'm actually going to quote this book a few more times throughout this episode. This book was written by Thomas More, and it is absolutely incredible for connecting astrology to psychology. So I highly recommend it for anybody that wants to explore this topic deeper. All right, so psychologically, Luna, aka the moon, is the gateway to embodiment and personalization of fantasies, complexes, and archetypal possibilities. She stands true in her typical anima or soul image as a bridge between the personal and the archetypal. From our personal perspective, our Luna within is sensed as that consciousness of suprapersonal or unconscious realities which play a role in life, but are not conscious creations. So it's almost like it's there, it's impacting us, but we're not always aware when it's impacting us, which is why it's really nice. Astrology is great for kind of picking up on those patterns so that you start to do it and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm doing the thing again. So it kind of helps us not only give us that language, but to sort of recognize that conditioning within ourselves. And then once we recognize it, we can start to almost like recondition.
Right.
So it's very empowering to learn about the moon. And the moon is where we retreat, right? When we want to feel safe, when we need to sort of relax and rest into ourselves. So the I can go into that a little bit. It is symbolic for our inner foundation. So the family history, the ancestral lineage, it's the emotional soil which we're born out of. So it's the very bottom of the chart, right? It's the roots, it's the foundation. And through that, as we grow up through the chart, like the midheaven, which would be like the upper sky or the middle sky, is going to be based off of those roots. But we don't always see the roots, right? It's very personal, right? But the IC is absolutely influencing the MC, which would be the midheaven, and we'll talk about that later. So it is more of the private self, the part that we kind of keep hidden, or it's not always visible to everyone unless they were around us, you know, and we feel safe and comfortable in their presence. We might start to show that part of our chart a little bit more. From a Jungian lens, the IC can be seen as part of the unconscious roots of identity, the hidden base from which the conscious self grows. So the next aspect in the model of the psyche is the collective unconscious. So we've just talked about the personal, and now we have the collective. So our personal and conscious exists within the collective. So it's like it's intertwined, but the collective is more all encompassing of everything. So instead of just being like our families, you know, our immediate families past, it's sort of like the ancestral memories of the collective experience that every human being that's ever existed has participated in, sort of culminating all of the content that makes up the collective unconscious. So the collective unconscious is the realm of archetypes and myths. So it's sort of this shared reservoir of stories, all the ancestral memories, and also our instincts. You could connect the collective unconscious to the planet Neptune or the 12th house. You know, I consider the 12th house to sort of be like the archetypal landscape of that collective unconscious. So, you know, if you're looking to tap into that aspect of your chart, paying attention to certain transits that are going to activate that 12th house, you can pay attention. I naturally have Neptune in the 12th house, so I always kind of just see myself as naturally having access into that collective memory.
Right.
So, if you're a 12th houser and you have quite a lot of emphasis there in your chart, you may be more connected to myths and folklore and these archetypal stories that are uniting us all, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's where I would say that's the energy that I would say is connected to that aspect of the model. The next would be the shadow. So for the shadow, we could look at a couple different things. We could look at Pluto, we could look at the 8th house, we could look at Mars and Saturn, and really everything has the shadow aspect to it. So every planet has the ability to bring out shadow content, right? But these are going to be the ones that are more obvious, I would say, that we could study. So the shadow is sort of our obsessions, our fears, our repressed power. And I say that with emphasis because there is power in the shadow. It's not just something that we want to like throw out. It's also the repressed, denied aspects of ourselves, right? And me and you did a whole episode on the shadow. So the shadow can show up within challenging aspects. For instance, like Mars squaring our moon could bring out repressed anger. The 12th house might bring up like things that are hidden from the self. And so the shadow could also fall into the 12th house as well as the 8th house. Pluto or Saturn transits might trigger things that bring some of this unconscious shadow material up for us to see. And I'm going to read once again from the Planets Within book because I really loved the way that Thomas described the Mars aspect here. We may tend to keep Martian spirit out of our temperament because we find it morally toxic. Yet, perhaps by keeping anger outside of the realm of moral possibility, we allow for incursions of more violent forms of Martian spirit. Mars contains a great deal of shadow, at least for some. This is especially true among people whose religious upbringing has led them to such a pacific general attitude that any sign of Martian red rage or militant force is a sure signal of evil. Today, Mars is warded off by phrases such as, "I didn't want to hurt anyone." Martian spirit is indeed forceful and feelings can be hurt when his spirit is present, but often the result of keeping feelings placid is simply another form of Mars, the rage against self. It is curious that Mars and Saturn are often linked together, for they correspond to two types of depression. So Saturn is going to bring up a lot of those unconscious fears, right? And when we repress things, a lot of times they do come out as fears and phobias and complexes and things.
Yeah.
So we did this, the shadow episode, and we definitely talked about these repressing rage, repressing anger. And that's, you're literally pushing it deeper.
Yeah.
Right. Deeper down. And then what happens is over time, it sort of makes you more combustible.
Right.
So you might be more likely to react or be more of this extreme anger instead of in the moment when that Martian energy is active and wants to be expressed. It's like you can express it in a way that's healthy for both parties. But when we repress and that anger builds, then we really start we're literally feeding the shadow at that point.
Yeah, it becomes real unmanageable and unwieldy.
Right. So Jung's idea of the shadow is not just viewed as this like negative part of ourselves. It holds untapped gifts. So when we work consciously with these energies through inner reflection, therapy, or ritual, this is how we turn lead into gold. So these disowned parts of ourselves, these rejected, these denied aspects of ourselves, they are both dark and golden, right? And remember when we did that shadow work episode, Robert Johnson talks about ritual as a way to acknowledge the shadow and sort of give it this outlet of expression.
Right.
And that kind of helps us, especially if we have a tendency to repress it, right? So the next aspect of the model of the psyche is the anima and animus. So you could see these themes coming out with Venus and Mars' relationship and or the seventh house. So the anima animus is our projections within relationships. It is the inner feminine within men and the inner masculine within women. So there is this just natural sort of tension of opposites. And Jung talks about when opposites meet, a third appears. And coming back around to this concept now, it brought me to this part of the planets within book, which it goes into the fact that Venus and Mars give birth to harmony. And I think that's very interesting because I feel like that's that third. So when we're able to reconcile these opposites, we bring these opposing forces together, it gives us this opportunity to bring more harmony within our psyches. And, Jung has a whole thing on the transient function, which is him sort of integrating, animus together, or the conscious and unconscious together, ego and shadow together. And when we allow these forces to sort of merge and, it's like they integrate and we become more whole, we become more ourselves. When all of the aspects of ourselves are loved, honored, and respected. And that is a big part of the individuation process. And it does take a lifetime, right, of exploring these things as they arise. And, you can't just like pay $1,000 and go to therapy for a month and cover all of this stuff, right? It's almost like a lot of it happens organically, but through things like alchemy, we can explore it a little bit more consciously, a little bit more directly, to where it's not just like these unconscious things are just coming out of nowhere.
Right.
And just running the ship. With the anima and the animus, we're really learning through paradox here. So in Jungian psychology, the persona is the mask that we wear to interact with the world. It's how we want to be seen and perceived, how we adapt to social expectations, and the image that we construct in order to be accepted. A lot of people will associate the first house with the persona. In esoteric astrology, it's more of the soul. So it kind of holds both, right? It can be the persona, but I think once you've done a lot of spiritual work, how you present yourself is actually more authentic. Yeah. So it doesn't always have to be. So the first house is really kind of what we see, that first introduction, stepping into a new interaction when you meet someone in person. From Jung's view, the persona is necessary, but oftentimes it's limited. It helps us function socially, but it isn't the true representation of who we are. In the midheaven, which we talked about earlier, which its Latin translation would be middle of the sky, the highest point in our chart, this is associated with our public image. So I kind of see it is the persona, but it's like the persona that we present, like our online presence, our work presence, which is a little bit more groomed and manicured than just those natural interactions that we're having. We meet someone at the grocery store, we're probably going to bump more into the first house, part of their persona. And I used to really judge myself as an astrologer. I used to be like, I'm really bad at this, because I would meet these people and I would try to make these assumptions, right? Like these guesses about like what is their rising sign, because it's like, okay, well, that's how they're presenting, right? And I would look at their chart and I was always guessing their 10th house, which is connected to the midheaven in a lot of, it's not always 10th house, but I was guessing their midheaven sign, right? That's how I saw them. And then I realized that in this day and age, most of us meet people online first. And so I was seeing like their work. I was seeing the image that they perfectly manicured to present, right, so that they could meet people from that more professional. And I was like, okay, so maybe I don't suck at this. I just didn't realize. that there's almost two perspectives to the persona in this day and age
Yeah.
with the technology.
I think the fact that you're able to realize that and that you were picking up on it being more like a 10th house thing shows that you're actually an excellent astrologer and you're able to figure that detail out where a lot of people might not have even picked up on that. They just be like, well, I can't guess the right rising sign.
Right. So yeah, I mean, you have to be open to continual learning, and if you feel like, okay, I've made a mistake, then investigate that. Like, where's the hole in this theory? Like, give yourself grace to explore and not just be like, oh, I suck at this, you know. And I naturally kind of fall into that, but I have found that when I stick with it and start to investigate, it tends to make sense. Like, there was just this miscommunication, or I didn't know this other factor yet. And so, you know,
Right.
we have to give ourselves grace when studying such a complicated system. And as we live our life, you know, astrology has to be lived. It has to be experienced to fully be understood. So you can learn all of the facts. You can, you know, memorize all of these definitions, you know, and there's a lot of that is a necessity.
Yeah.
But the magical aspect of astrology, what makes you really good at it is once you start to like live it, experience it, and be able to relate what you've learned into your inner and outer experience.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what separates, or it's when you're bringing in both of these hemispheres, you know, you're bringing in the intuition, you're bringing in the logical mind, and you're giving it room to evolve, which is what we do not want to reify or, you know, put astrology into this box.
Right. So you mentioned individuation a few times. Can you define individuation and touch on its connection to alchemy?
All right. So I've lightly defined it, but we'll come back to it. So individuation is the lifelong journey of becoming whole, which we do by integrating all aspects of the psyche, both the conscious and the unconscious aspects, to become the fullest and most authentic version of ourselves. So Jung saw deep parallels between the inner process and the symbolic language of alchemy. He believed that the alchemical images were not just about turning lead into gold, literally, but they were powerful metaphors for psychological transformation. They were showing and representing stages of shadow work, ego dissolution, and the eventual integration of the self. So, though Jung published more extensively on alchemy, he also viewed astrology as a valid symbolic system that emerged from the collective unconscious. So he really did this beautiful thing of kind of combining all of these different fields in this beautiful, coherent way. So, you know, and his daughter, Gret Baumann-Jung, carried his legacy forward. She became a respected astrologer in Switzerland and continued to bridge depth psychology with astrological insight.
That's interesting.
So he really created this legacy.
That his daughter moved into the astrological field.
Mm-hmm.
That's wild. How do these components show up in daily life? And what would you say is the cost of neglecting the unconscious?
I love this question. So they show up through things like projection, our reactions, our dream life, our internal conflicts. They can show up in our creative expression, our relationships, life crises, and complexes. So when you say what is the cost of neglecting the unconscious, I would say it's these complexes that arise. So sometimes we become more reactive, stuck in certain patterns, cut off from our own creativity, or dominated by complexes that we don't understand. So in Jungian psychology, a complex is a cluster of emotionally charged thoughts, memories, perceptions, and feelings centered around a particular theme. They are often rooted in past experiences, especially from childhood. So this brings up a little bit of that lunar energy. For example, one might have a mother complex if there is some unresolved dynamics with the mother that are still influencing how one might relate to nurturing, their authority, or their femininity. So, in the chart, this could show up as Saturn aspecting the moon in some way. Since the moon represents the feminine force and the mother and the past. and Saturn can create fears and restrictions and boundaries, right? And so, if you look at a chart and there is this Saturn moon relationship, the mother complex might be what comes forward initially. Complexes are stored in the personal unconscious. So they operate autonomously, which means that they can take over our behavior or our emotional reactions without us even realizing it.
Yeah.
They show up in dreams and our projections, our emotional triggers, and everyone has them. It is a part of the human experience. And Jung did not see these complexes as inherently bad. It's just something that needs to be made conscious in order for us to grow and integrate the self. So working through a complex is challenging, but when we were listening to Alice, her interview last night, she was talking about how, Jung says we can work through a complex, but we have to drink it to the last drop. And as she said that, I imagined Harry Potter, where, Harry and Dumbledore go to whatever realm to like discover the Horcrux, and he's like, Harry, I have to drink till the last drop.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is such a beautiful, and this is what I love about letting the imagination kind of take off when you're studying Jung or astrology or whatever. These stories just start to come up intuitively. And I was like, that is such a beautiful representation. And he's like, don't, I'm going to ask you to stop, but don't let me.
Yeah.
Right. And it's almost like that is an important part of really integrating a complex is you have to look at it, you have to know it, you have to love it, you have to integrate it. And it is a process, and it's not necessarily easy, but it's worthwhile. So I'm going to read again from The Planets Within, because this is just, it beautifully answers this question that you just asked. Jung held that any unconscious factor, if neglected and repressed, would become so overwhelming that it might wipe away all ego involvement. It might appear at times that Mars himself takes over a body and commits murder, or Venus swamps the ego and drives esteemed senators to burlesque stages and massage parlors. Jung's solution is to establish a relationship with our dark fantasies, find those little people, and see if we can make some deals. In order to do that, it is necessary first to become acquainted with those inner personified figures who appear nightly in our dreams and occasionally pop out in uncharacteristic behavior and action. Often people not accustomed to outbursts of anger will find themselves hurled into a rage, and afterward they invariably say, "What came over me?" Maybe the proper question is, who came over me? Who came over me? The figure within who rages may be a composite of many things: past experiences, identifications with friends, or perhaps an uninvited but proper resident in the house of the personal psyche. Beneath and beyond these personal factors, there is the archetypal, essentially human and transhuman force of conflict, battle, and rage. Mars himself. So I really love the way that he explained this, because we'd already lightly touched on Mars with the shadow, and this is sort of an example of how that might come out through a complex.
Right.
To where we almost take on and identify with some archetype. And because it's unconscious, we don't realize it until after, and then we reflect and we're like, wow, like, was that me?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I really wasn't acting like me, was I?
Right.
And the more we spend on this sort of process of self-awareness and self-actualization, the more we become ourselves, the less likely we're going to be sort of overtaken by these complexes.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll show up as ourselves. So,
Speaking of archetypes, can you define what archetypes are through Jung's perspective?
yes, I have used this word a lot, so I'm glad you came back to this. So, in Jung's view, archetypes are primordial universal symbols or patterns that exist within the collective unconscious. They are not learned, but inherited. They are shared by all humans, regardless of our culture or time. One might think of them as the psychic DNA of the human soul.
I like that.
They're not fully conscious or literal, but they express themselves through things like dreams, myths, fairy tales, art, religion, symbols like tarot, astrology, or folklore, personal experiences and projections. So, archetypes may appear differently across different cultures or time periods, but they carry this underlining universal essence. So if we look at the trickster, for example, through this archetypal lens, we may see the trickster show up in Native American mythology as the coyote, who looks different than sort of the Greco-Roman Hermes or Mercury archetypes, which come back to that trickster energy. Or in Norse mythology, we have the deity Loki. So each embody the trickster archetype in distinct ways, yet all reflect the same core energy, right? They all have this disruption aspect, this mischief, this transformation, but they look a lot different. And they also have their own kind of personal attributes that separate them.
Right.
And so it's almost like getting in touch with the overarching theme and the essence of the archetype will help you kind of pinpoint. But, in that Saffron Rossi video we just watched, and she is like a master of mythology, that she like teaches a class on mythology. She's talking about archetypes. Inherently, we cannot know them. We can only know images that we've projected onto them, or our experience, like the feelings that arise when we are working with those forces. And so we are the ones sort of personifying them in order to know them better, but inherently they're unknowable, right?
That's why in each culture they're personified differently, because it's that particular culture putting their own experience and their own life view onto that archetype.
Right.
Which is why the trickster shows up as coyote for Native Americans versus Loki for the Nordic people.
Right.
So it's their own perspective, but it's ultimately that them trying to personify the trickster,
right,
the best way they can with what they have to work with.
Right. And as you start to really work with your chart, maybe you see Mercury playing tricks, but maybe you're relating it more to the coyote story. So allowing it to sort of expand and where your intuition's going, like exploring these different cultural perspectives, helps keep the chart alive and fresh. So, you can bring in different stories from different cultures that are bringing in those overarching archetypes if you wish, if that helps make sense of what you're seeing.
Right.
So it's like you can have fun and play and explore the archetypes through these different cultural perspectives if you wish. I mean, a lot of people tend to stick to one. And I think in the beginning that's very helpful to just kind of ground your practice. But, there's so much room to grow and be creative with our astrological practice.
Definitely. So do you think you could briefly explain how mythology reflects psychological forces within us?
Yes. So all of the gods, all of the myths, they are all personifications of universal processes. And they all exist within us. So the gods, the goddesses, the monsters, The heroes that we find in these myths, they represent different aspects of the human psyche. Our desires, our fears, our instincts, strengths, and the shadows that exist within that human experience. So, for example, Aphrodite can symbolize the longing for love, beauty, and connection. Mars reflects aggression, willpower, and conflict. Hades can represent the unconscious, the transformation, and, the subterranean, the underworld of the self. So, from a Jungian perspective, these mythic figures are archetypes, right? Because they are these primordial patterns that live within the collective unconscious. So when we read or resonate with a myth, we're recognizing something deep and timeless within ourselves, something that's alive within us. And a lot of times I'll tell people, mythology is alive, and I don't think they fully get it.
Right.
And it's hard until you can see yourself living out a myth, or you can look back on a certain transit and say, oh my gosh, right? Like I was in the underworld, right? I was Persephone. I was embodying, this particular archetype at that time. And that makes so much more sense in retrospect. Right? So in this way, mythology becomes this mirror, which helps us understand and integrate the many layered forces that shape our inner and outer world.
Okay. Can you connect the zodiac signs and planets to the archetypal energies?
So to summarize all this is, it's easy and challenging because my course that I teach on astrology ranges from 5 to 6 hours, and just the planet segment alone is like 2 hours. So I have briefly tried to summarize these, but just know that there's so much more to it, right? But this is just sort of like a quick overview. So the zodiac signs represent the archetypal energies, and so do the planets. Each have their own mythology. Each zodiac sign has its own planetary ruler, which helps give it meaning. There's elemental qualities to the zodiac signs and modalities there. Each of these form a mythical layer that helps deepen our understanding of how the psyche is expressing itself through our birth chart. The planetary rulers blend into the overall archetypal interpretation of a zodiac sign, and they influence how each of these signs move through the world and how they're perceived. So you cannot separate the zodiac sign from the planet that rules it, because they're like enmeshed together. So we're going to look at each of these signs through this multi-dimensional lens. So Aries is a cardinal fire sign. So I'm not going to go through the modalities each time or the elements each time, but we will talk about Aries specifically to give you kind of a taste. Cardinal energy is initiating, and Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. It is connected to the spring equinox. So we think about initiating, planting the seed of that season. It starts the season, right? And fire is warm, enthusiastic, passionate, intuitive. And so that is how the modality and the element start to blend in, because all of those things are associated with Aries, right? The overarching archetype that most of us might agree on connected to Aries would be the warrior. Right?
Definitely.
And that's coming from the fact that it's ruled by Mars, who is also the warrior planetary archetype, right? And so you can kind of see how, it's the planet, it's the modality, it's the element that's bringing in this overall energy to the archetype that is Aries. So there's willpower, instinct, initiation, and primal courage that's associated with Mars and Aries. And you can also look at the myth, right? The myth is also gives us other layers. So the myth that's associated with Aries, the most common myth, right? There's so many myths that you could actually bring into the planets and signs. But the myth that I most associate with Aries is the myth of the golden ram, whose fleece was sought by Jason and the Argonauts. So this myth symbolizes the call to adventure, bravery, and initiation. And all together, um, these help us really relate and connect to Aries, right? So the second sign would be Taurus. And if you think in seasons, what cardinal is the beginning, it's where we planted the seed. And now we have planted the seed and it's starting to take root. And so Taurus is a fixed earth sign, right? And fixed signs are all very grounded and stable, okay? So the overall archetype that you can associate with Taurus would be the Earth Mother or the bull. So it's ruled by Venus, so that gives it this natural fertility, this sort of sensual energy. And the groundedness and stability is coming from that fixed earth energy. So the myth linked is the sacred bull, which is connected to the myth of Europa. And you can look into that myth a little bit more. So Gemini would be the last phase of this season, right? So Gemini is a mutable air sign. So it's the ending of a season. It's about to change. So then the nature of mutable energy is it's changeable, it's flexible, it's adaptable. And Gemini is an air sign. The archetype that we tend to give Gemini is the trickster because it's ruled by Mercury. So some of the energy that goes with Gemini is this: there's this duality, curiosity, wit, adaptability. And the myth that's connected to Gemini is the myth of Castor and Pollux. So these are the divine twins. One was mortal, one was immortal. And naturally, Gemini has this, it embodies this duality, this storytelling, this bridge between the worlds, right? Because all of these things come together to give us that meaning, right? So Cancer is a cardinal water sign. The archetype could be the caregiver or the inner child. It's ruled by the moon, which is connected to emotional intelligence, memory, nurturing, and belonging. The myth tied to Cancer is the crab who aided the Hydra in battle against Hercules and was honored by Hera. So it represents the protective loyalty, the emotional tenacity, and our devotion to home. Leo is a fixed fire sign. The archetypes that come in mind would be like the sovereign king or queen. It is ruled by the sun. So it's creative. It has a self-expression. There's some pride, identity, and radiance, which you would think of with the sun. It's very warm.
Right.
In the sun, you could also look at the physiological correspondence rules the heart. And so you think of things like the lion-hearted, and you can see how this, you never get bored being an astrologer because you see these correspondences everywhere. It's quite lovely.
That's the truth.
The myth linked to Leo is the Nemean lion, which was slain by Hercules within the 12 labors. So we have strength, solar power, and heroic individuality all tied to Leo. So Virgo is a mutable earth sign. The archetype that comes forward would be the healer or the analyst. It is ruled by Mercury. So Mercury rules 2 signs. Venus rules 2 signs. And, some other planets too. So there is a service aspect with Virgo. There's refinement, discernment, sacred order. And the myth that's most connected to this particular sign would be the myth of Demeter and Persephone. So the goddess of the harvest and seasonal cycles. And sort of the overarching essence would be service, purity, and the wisdom of nature's rhythms. Libra is a cardinal air sign. The archetype most associated with Libra would be like the diplomat. It is ruled by Venus, so there is like some aesthetic charm, social harmony, justice, and relational balance. The myth associated with this sign would be the myth of Astrea, the goddess of justice who ascended to the stars during the fall of the Golden Age. And it symbolizes equilibrium, fairness, and divine order, and or right relationship. Scorpio is a fixed water sign. Archetypally, we could look at it as the ultimate alchemist or the transformer. It's ruled by Pluto. Modernly, traditionally, it's ruled by Mars. So it has both of those planetary archetypes playing into it. Things that come to mind would be death, rebirth, transformation, taboo. It's linked to Orion's death by the scorpion, which was placed in the heavens by Zeus. It symbolizes death, rebirth, and the power of the unseen. Sagittarius is a mutable fire sign. It is associated with the seeker or the philosopher. It is ruled by Jupiter, which brings in that expansion, that seeking for truth and spiritual exploration and finding adventure, in things in life. The myth connected is the myth of Crotus. Sometimes people will associate it with Chiron, but I just personally don't see. Just because Chiron's a centaur does not mean that he is associated with this. So Crotus is a mythological centaur. He is the son of Pan and a skilled hunter, musician, archer who lived among the muses. He is accredited with inventing applause and was placed among the stars by the gods in recognition of talents. So he, to me, makes a little bit more sense than Chiron, who I love, but just doesn't, to me, connect.
Yeah.
And Capricorn is cardinal earth. You could look at Capricorn as the elder or the builder. It is ruled by Saturn, so there are themes of time and structure, mastery, that long-term vision, that devotion. The myth that I'm saying goes mostly with this would be the myth of the sea goat or Precious, which is a creature from Greek mythology who was created by Kronos or Saturn. The sea goat represents the union of the material and the spiritual, climbing mountains while remembering the depths. So these would be themes of discipline, endurance, and wisdom over time. Aquarius is a fixed air sign. It's connected to the archetype of the visionary. It is modernly ruled by Uranus, traditionally Saturn. There are themes of innovation, disruption, and collective insight. The myth tied to Aquarius is usually linked to Ganymede, the beautiful youth taken to Olympus to serve as the cupbearer to the gods. Some people bring up that the myth of Prometheus fits really well with Aquarius. So there you can kind of come up with your own interpretations there. If it fits and you can make it work, you're allowed to choose the myth that works for you. Oh. So Aquarius represents offering sacred knowledge and serving collective evolution. And last but not least, Pisces is a mutable water sign. It's associated with the mystic or the dreamer. It is modernly ruled by Neptune and traditionally Jupiter. The themes would be transcendence, compassion, illusion, and unity. And the myth connected is the two fish who carried Aphrodite and Eros to safety from the monster Typhon. So this speaks of transcendence, divine escape, and spiritual surrender, which all plays into what we know as Pisces. So just a little exercise after doing that. I invite you to reflect on one of these archetypes that you resist and one that you fully embody.
That's tricky. I'd have to think on that, but it sounds intriguing.
Right. Yeah, we don't have to do it right now.
Right.
You don't have to do it, the audience.
That's fascinating. The personification definitely helps paint a better picture for the signs and the zodiac symbols, and really helps you understand how they might be interacting with you or what they might be bringing out of you. Mm-hmm. If one of them is activated in a certain part of your chart. So that's fascinating. Thinking about the birth chart, how can the birth chart be a tool for individuation?
So I would like to really emphasize viewing the chart as this evolving mandala. So as we grow and evolve with our chart through certain transits and initiatory phases of life, we leave room for growth. We leave room for transcending certain maybe fixed ways of viewing ourselves. We allow the chart to come to life, to speak to us in a certain way. So with this in mind, individuation, it involves integrating polarities, which we talked about with the transcendent function.
Mm-hmm.
So like light and shadow, inner, outer, masculine, feminine, all of these forces can be found within the natal chart, and astrology helps us map these opposites, right? So there's literally oppositions. There's sister signs. So you can look at the chart and see, are these two players opposing each other? Are they squaring each other? What is the overall tension here? And what would be a creative way to find resolution, right? We've talked a little bit about doing shadow work, which can be guided by looking at planets like Pluto and Saturn, or houses like the 8th or the 12th. The birth chart invites this approach where no part of our psyche needs to be rejected, only understood and embraced. So it gives us this permission, this allowance to witness ourselves both objectively and subjectively. It helps us foster greater self-awareness and compassion. And looking at it from this self-awareness perspective, each of these planets, signs, and houses represent an archetypal force, a part of the psyche. And when we are exploring these symbols, it helps us recognize and name aspects of ourselves that may otherwise stay unconscious, that may be harder to identify without years of psychotherapy. The chart helps expand our capacity to understand our lives through this deeper symbolic lens, revealing more meaning within our own experiences and our own inner patterns. And another way to use the chart would be tracking your own growth through the cycle. So this is going to bring in astrological transits and progressions, which are reflecting in real time our own inner growth processes. So you could look at certain transits. For instance, the Saturn return is a big one that most of us have heard about. It happens around, between the ages of 28 and 30. So it brings up themes of maturity, responsibility. There can be major life shifts, endings, responsibility check-ins. So if you're going through that transit, you can interact with it in this more conscious way, and or you can go back in time and connect to the version of yourself that moved through that challenge and let that empower you right now.
Right.
And so you can get creative with it. Some other big life transits would be the nodal returns, which happen. So this would be North and South Node, return to the place that they were, right, at the moment that you were born. So at 18, 37, and 55, and on and on. This particular transit sort of helps realign and activate your sense of purpose. It brings up karmic energy because these are karmic nodes. It may help redirect and point you more towards, the direction that's going to offer the most growth and spiritual fulfillment, even though sometimes that feels very unfamiliar and unnecessary, to know that you're at that point.
Right.
It helps you give more meaning to that moment in time. It's like you're more devoted to the process. You take it more seriously. There's more reverence, right? We're bringing ritual back into our life, which is something that our ancestors have, that we have lost.
Yeah.
And through these rituals alone, it supports that individuation process. So another big transit would be the Chiron return, which happens around 50. This can be a time of very deep healing and initiation into our own wisdom and our own ability to sort of heal, to see ourselves holistically and heal our wounds that are arising at that time. And another big transit would be Uranus opposite Uranus, which can happen around 42. And we've given this one a name in our culture, which is the midlife crisis.
Oh, yeah.
To know that you're either in that, or you can prepare, or you can look back, you can reflect. It gives you this beautiful ability to see your life, to see your myth, to see your gifts, your strengths, right? So the birth chart, it can be read as this mandala of our soul. It carries with it this symbolic structure that helps us remember and reassemble parts of ourselves. It's not about becoming this different person, but it's about becoming and stepping into ourselves more fully, like who we really are, consciously and compassionately. And as Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So astrology is giving us this language to help make that which would naturally be unconscious conscious.
Yeah.
To work with it directly and not to be a victim of circumstance, right? So there's this empowering aspect that can come through working with your chart. And I brought this quote. Jung has a lot of work on mandalas, so that's a whole deep dive you can go into. But I love this Jung quote, which comes from The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. It says, "The mandala serves a constructive purpose, namely to restore a previous existing order, but it also serves the creative purpose of giving expression and form to something that does not exist yet." And so I really love looking at the chart as a mandala because it's like this circle, there's this symmetry, there's natural symbolic energy enmeshed into it. And I think approaching it creatively, it gives us this form of expression. Mm-hmm. It brings this like poetic, juicy, symbolic language. It's a beautiful creative outlet, and it's like it gives us access to view life as this sacred ritual in itself, to look at these transits, or these phases as a part, like as these initiations.
Right.
That our ancestors had rituals that supported that, but we have lost it. And to me, astrology is such a good way of bringing that back in.
Well, how do you use your chart in a living way? You're describing that it's kind of alive. Mm-hmm. How would you engage with your chart in that living way?
So a way that you can engage with it from a living perspective would be by checking in with it during these certain life transitions, journaling around certain placements, certain aspects, reflecting and looking at these as sort of invitations for self-growth. And I think it was in this Planets Within book in the beginning, and maybe it was like Ficino or Tom, I don't know, because this book is heavily blended with Ficino's theory on astrology as well. But I remember when I read this book, and it was talking about having your chart in a place that you see it regularly, like, so it keeps it in your conscious awareness, even if you're not just staring at it, like, you're walking past it. Mm-hmm. Right. And it keeps it alive, it keeps it fresh, and it also allows like the glyphs and things to sort of come alive and speak to you differently on different days as you sort of evolve and go through certain things. You might be like, oh wow, it's really pointing to this house right now.
Right.
And so I took this so literally that I started embroidering natal charts so that people could hang them up and that they would be pretty, and it kind of makes them this like living art. And when I first started my practice, I would always hand draw charts very Lisa Frankie, like glitter pens, lots of colors. And I would put, some keywords to help me integrate it. And I encourage everyone to do this for themselves. I stopped doing it because I'm like, wow, this takes a lot of time and glitter ink.
They were beautiful, though.
They were so beautiful. And I think drawing it yourself is such a valuable thing, to help you memorize it, to help you connect with it directly. And as you're drawing it, if you had some references out for like just some overall themes of the house, overall themes that go with the signs and the planets, and then, allow it to kind of start to speak to you, allow yourself to start to blend these different concepts together.
Yeah.
Right. And to see like, how does that make sense for me in this very personal way in this moment? So some suggested tools would be, journaling, doing dream work, therapy. Like some of the things that you're discovering in therapy, look at your chart and see if you can, make sense of it in a very practical way within the natal chart, and working with your chart like a mirror. So when we're working with the transits as invitations, it offers this beautiful room for integration, and they can help activate this unconscious material, and it offers us a chance to meet ourselves more fully. So in closing, remember that you are the whole chart. You carry all the planets, all the signs, and all of these houses, all these archetypal forces within you. And the gift here is that this means that you can call upon any of these energies that you need in any given moment.
Mm-hmm.
So once you've built this relationship and you've learned how to make sense of its language, it becomes this key tool. There's moments in my life where I channel some of these archetypal forces, especially ones that I don't have like this over emphasis on in my chart.
Yeah.
So I may pretend for that moment that I'm a Taurus because I need to put my hose in the mud.
Right.
I need to fixate right now. I need grounded stability right now. So in that moment, I actually channel that Taurus energy.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter that I don't have a planet in Taurus, right?
Yeah.
It still rules my fourth house. So my IC is there. So there's a lot of, it's already naturally grounded, but it's actually the root and foundation of my chart. I have full permission to bring it forward and call it in to my present awareness in that moment and embody that archetype, because that is what I need, right? To get that work done.
Yeah.
Right. And so once you've worked with these energies in their essences, you can start to not only see them in your outer world, but you can call upon them. And that's where I feel like the magic kind of ends, because you start to see them as friends, supportive energies that you can work with at any point. And what a beautiful gift to be able to utilize the chart in this way.
Right. Well, there's one thing that's very clear, and that you are definitely knowledgeable on these topics and all of astrology, and I'm so impressed with your astrological skills, and you're just growing and learning by the day. And if other people are interested in knowing more, whether that's just learning about astrology or learning about their own natal chart, you can help with both of those things, because you've got your feet in the water in multiple areas. Tell people a little bit, you're not only offering natal chart readings, but you're also teaching astrology class to help people learn some of this on their own and dig a little deeper in their own knowledge. Could you tell people a little bit about both those things and how they would reach out to you or get some more information about them?
Yes. So I do offer natal chart readings and astrology classes. I offer both of these in person and on Zoom. So for in person, I tend to post that more on my Facebook or Instagram, because that, local, that's more local to my area. But the Zoom option is there for those who live a little further away or don't have this ability to access me in person. And you can find all the details for, you know, booking a reading with me or signing up for one of my future astrology classes on my website at astralmeadow.com. And, following me on Instagram is probably the best way to keep up with all of my interests because I have a very wide ranging love for all of these different things. So it's hard to keep up with it in one place, but you can follow me on Instagram at Astral Meadows. So my next astrology class is the Zoom one. It's online and it's going to be in July. And what I've done is I've split it into two. So you would pay like the one fee, but we will meet twice because what I was finding is that it was so much material. It was hard on me mentally to hold it that long, which I have done it. But I think splitting it, so I've made the class a little bit longer, but then I split it into 2 days. So, the first part will go into the planets and really just hyper focus on that archetypal kind of aspect. And then people can go and do and like look at their chart and practice and come up with some really good questions, right? And ground. And then come back to the next class. And now that they've kind of integrated that, then when we go into, the zodiac and the houses and the aspects and planetary condition, they're more mentally available because I just felt like at the end of the class, like I was losing people a little bit as far as the focus. And I was losing focus so long, but I can't make it any shorter. So what I decided to do was split it into two. So if you see that and you're like, it's one payment, two classes, it's an incredible class. It is the class that I wish that I had in the beginning to really get me started, to give me that guidance and direction, because I think in the beginning we're learning like little bits of astrology here or there, and it's really hard to ground into it because it's just like all these different views and we're not really taking notes and we're not really focusing for extended periods of time. So it's like
right.
This class is created to bring it all together in a really cohesive way, and it's perfect for the beginner. And I will be creating different levels to it. So as I teach this beginner class a few more times and collect a little bit more interest, I will spend the fall and the winter creating level 2, which is going to go a little bit deeper into really applying it all and giving us some good practice, reading other people's charts, looking at transits and progressions and solar returns and some of these different ways that we can apply it. But you have to have the foundation first.
Yeah.
And I do try to bring creativity into it and encourage my students to make their own books as we go. That's going to be a little different doing it through Zoom, but I'm going to try to at least give them some examples in space to create their own little booklet on their own. So
yeah, that's excellent. And I attended the first class that you did in person, and it was an amazing class. Lots of really incredible information and really clear and concise. And if you're interested in astrology, then it's exactly what you need to really toss you in and get that big base of knowledge that'll help you feel confident moving forward. I cannot recommend it enough.
Yeah. And if you'd like to support this podcast in other ways and help me to create more meaningful content, you can donate via Cash App or Venmo at Astral Meadow, or you can check out in the merch shop. There's a link through my website, astralmeadow.com. And if this episode resonated, please consider sharing it with like-minded individuals. I'm going to post some of my resources in the description. So some of the podcasts or the books that I've quoted, or just anything that comes up between now and posting that I think will help you guys go a little deeper into this concept, I will add that into the description box.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that'll be great.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to create this space and this beautiful episode with me. It means a lot to me, and it's been so beautiful to just have this time set aside to share this with the audience, because it's a topic I'm really passionate about. I really love giving people this perspective to look at astrology as something deeper than just this personality tool, which we all start there, right? We all start with this very exoteric view. So I'm not criticizing that, but I'm just honored to have this chance to kind of share with others how we can look at astrology from these different angles. And then it becomes this very deep, useful, spiritual tool, this practice that we can carry with us throughout the rest of our lives. Like, it is something that I come back to over and over and over again that gives me meaning, the sense of purpose, and it helps me create these beautiful rituals, helps me be tuned into the cycles of nature. There's so much beauty that astrology can help offer us and to add to our life. So I'm happy to be able to take a moment to kind of show that other perspective, which sometimes I feel like doesn't get represented enough.
Yeah. Well, honored to be here and to be the one helping you present this material and balancing it out with you here. It's always a pleasure, and I hope that it resonates with everyone as strongly as it has with you and me.
Yeah. So thank you so much, and thank you all for tuning in. Check us out next time on the Astral Hour.